Okay, welcome everybody. We're here with Stephanie Hockman, and she is the founder of Alvista Group, a talent development and executive coaching organization that focuses on attracting, growing, and retaining top talent. Alvista Loop is a talent development and executive coaching firm where Stephanie brings over 3 decades of experience developing teams and individuals in the finance industry and provides coaching, advising, and placement for millennials and Gen Zers in the finance industry. So, welcome, Stephanie.
Thanks, Ben. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Well, yeah, why don't you kick us off by just giving us a little bit about your background and before we jump into the conversation about HireVue.
Sure. Before founding Alvista Loop and that talent development and executive coaching business, as you mentioned, I spent over 3 decades in the finance industry. I started out as a tax consultant to hedge funds and investment partnerships at a now defunct Arthur Andersen accounting firm. And then I was an investment banker for almost 2 decades at Bank of America and BNP Paribas. And then for the last 10 years before founding Alvista Loop, I worked at Amherst College as the program director for careers in finance, where I was really coaching millennials and Gen Zers to find and place almost a third of the student population at Amherst College into positions in the finance industry. So I'm excited to be here and talk about my experiences over the last 3.5 decades and how I might be helpful to the current generation looking to find their home in the finance industry.
Absolutely. Love it. Such a critical topic. Well, it's great. I'm sure you've seen a great number of changes in the industry, I think, over that period of time. Excellent. Well, so yeah, I think so today we really want to get into, the use of these pre-recorded AI assisted types of interviewing tools. But just more broadly, why don't we start off by talking about the overarching recruitment uh, timeline and process, specifically maybe how things have changed pre-COVID versus post-COVID, and then how are things laid out today?
Absolutely. And I think that is probably one of the biggest changes we've seen in the last 5 years. So, pre COVID, most of the recruiting for your junior summer internship in finance was done in fall or even spring of your junior year. So, 6 to 12 months in advance. And then COVID hit and everything expedited. So, that is
Mm.
the key word here within the finance recruiting process is expedited. And so, post COVID, not only did we see the interview process timeline move up, but it's also using more AI tools, more video tools. So, for example, now what we're seeing is the interview process. If you are a freshman in college, your first year in college, you're going to have to explore the finance industry, determine what part of the industry you want to be in, and start networking by the end of your freshman year, the end of that first year.
Yep.
Because in fall of your sophomore year, you're going to be doing all the preparation, even more networking, because the interviews for your junior summer now begin as early as January of your sophomore year. So 18 months in advance. And that's just, it's crazy when you think about you're asking, or firms are asking 19-year-olds to think about what they want to do when they graduate at 22 years of age. But that's the way the process has gone. It's just become quicker and quicker. And that's the timeline. The process has also changed. So back in pre-COVID times, interviews were held in person on your college campuses or maybe in a phone interview. Post-COVID, everything is done virtually. And so that first step in the interview process is submitting your resume and cover letter. And the firms are using AI, artificial intelligence, and other types of bots to review resumes, as well as a manual review process for some firms. And then if candidates do well in that initial review of the resume and cover letter, they're then going to get a first round interview. And although there are still some telephone interviews and Zoom interviews, video interviews, a predominant process now is using these one-way video interviews like HireVue. And they're using that artificial intelligence that's set within HireVue or other artificial intelligence interview processes firms, and then determining who makes it to that final round or super day interviews. So it's a 3-step process with AI being used both in the resume and cover letter review, but AI also being used in that first round interview process. And it's not till you get to that super day where you're actually, a lot of times, talking to people at the firm in an in-person interview, which might be via Zoom or actually in person in their offices.
Thanks for laying out those three key steps. So it's like the three key categories haven't changed broadly, but how those are implemented and the tools that are being used and the speed at which and the timeline has all been shifted quite a bit. I want to go back to the resume and cover letter. You mentioned that there's certainly some keyword sort of screeners and AI tools there. What are the key I guess my question is more, yes, those are tools being used, but then there's sort of networking is kind of also in there. So it's like, what's your best advice for how do you get through that resume and cover letter phase to even get that first round interview?
What I tell most students that I work with is that you want to look at the job description as well as the website for the company and look at what the company is looking for. What are those job characteristics? Are they looking for financial acumen, collaboration, teamwork? What are some of those key words? And you want to make sure that those words are used in your resume and in your cover letter because the bots or the AI is actually looking for terminology like that. They're also looking at simple things like your GPA and is it hitting the specific threshold that's set up in the job description, et cetera. But it's really utilizing the words that you're hearing from people you're networking with, but also from the job descriptions and the websites.
Got it. Okay. Absolutely. So let's go a little deeper now into that first round. So we've got through the resume cover letter review. So tell us a little bit more about HireVue and why have companies specifically started to use that tool, and also recognizing that HireVue is a brand name. We're really just talking about AI-assisted video interviewing platforms, of which there are a number in the marketplace.
Yes, absolutely. HireVue is just that term we use. A lot of times it's a digital recruiting it's a digital recruiting company that is helping investment banks and other financial firms find the best candidates using artificial intelligence in the interviews. Things like Spark Hire are other ones that we see in the industry, but for finance, we see mostly HireVue. Unlike the in-person interviews, whether that's a video interview using Zoom or some other Google Meets or Teams, or a telephone, the HireVue interview, there's no direct interaction with the individual interviewer. So I think that can be really unsettling for candidates because you're basically talking to a blank screen, for lack of a better word, and we can get into a little bit more about that in a minute. But what I would say is it is unsettling to the candidates. So there's a lot of things we want to talk about on how to best perform in that HireVue interview. But what happens is the candidates are given the ability to record their responses to predetermined questions that are on the screens that are given to the candidates. And I would say a lot of the firms, the investment banks specifically, that are getting tens of thousands of applications have moved to this AI intervened process because it can be streamlining and making the process more efficient to look at large amounts of candidates. It also provides a more consistent and possibly less biased assessment. And then it's also giving the firms data insights, which a lot of firms are really looking for.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm sure it also assists with since it's asynchronous, it's got to be easy for the candidate and the interviewer just to get the interview done because the candidate can get it done at 11 o'clock at night or something if that's the only time they have available.
Yeah, I often tell candidates that it's really important to figure out when you're at your best. Are you a morning person? Are you a night owl? It really depends. And you want to do the recording at that point in time, which you can put your best foot forward. And I think that is much better. And I think especially for candidates in the middle of going to classes, playing in sports, or in an orchestra or whatever your extracurricular activities are, it allows them to find the time that's best for them, which I think is great for the candidates. But at the same time, it is a tool that the firms are really using to be able to vet through quite a few more candidates than they normally would have.
Right. Absolutely, yeah, which should also, from an employer perspective, that should ultimately result in just a higher quality talent pool in the super day, right? That's the goal. So tell us more about how does HireVue and these similar tools actually evaluate? I'm sure there's tell us more about the rubric or the scoring process and it delivers some type of numerical score. How does all that come together?
Absolutely. And I think I'll probably talk mostly around HireVue because I know that the best. I would assume that Spark Hire and some of the other platforms are very similar, but HireVue is what I know, so I'm going to speak to that. It is using artificial intelligence to analyze those recorded video interviews. HireVue specifically, their AI will analyze over 25,000 data points, and they're looking at factors like eye contact, rate of speech, tone of voice, poise, enthusiasm, and so many more things. It's looking at all the things that make up sort of how you present yourself, that gravitas that you have, which is hard on a one-way video interview, right? It's hard to come across as enthusiastic and passionate when you're staring at a computer screen as you would in an in-person interaction or even over Zoom. And so what happens is AI will look at that, look at all the 25,000 data points, or at least HireVue does, and they will compare that to the employer's preferred criteria. So how does that preferred criteria come about? What a lot of firms do is they will ask their top performers to go and do a HireVue interview with these exact same questions that are going to be asked of the candidates. Yeah. The AI intelligence will then create a numeric score based on how those top performers do. And that is the benchmark in which the candidates are then judged against.
Gotcha. So, well, that sounds pretty tricky. It's almost like it's almost like a video audition.
If you will. Is. It's exactly that. And it's not as casual as this type of conversation, right? It's really stressful for the candidate. And I think, one thing that I would say is oftentimes the candidates are so focused on how are they going to respond? What's that verbal content? I'm going to make sure I tell my intelligence across. But what the AI is looking at is all those ancillary characteristics that you've really got to master.
Yeah, all the nonverbals, right?
Yep, all the nonverbals.
So it seems like there's several thousand data points. It seems like maybe a majority of them are focused on nonverbal cues in the different like you said, eye contact, tone, cadence, enthusiasm, and these types of things versus just the pure technical content of the answer.
Yeah, I mean, the technical content is important, right? How you answer the questions, what the content is, does matter. But nowadays, with HireVue and other AI and assessment tools, how you answer is equally as important.
Well, I guess another way to say it would be, yes, you have to know the technical content of the answer, and that's non-negotiable. And you've also got to rehearse the nonverbal content of the answer.
Absolutely. Got to do a lot of practicing.
Yeah. How do you, since we're on that note around practicing and preparation, I think there's a lot of content out there covering the technical way to respond to a lot of these questions. Walk me through your resume or walk me through $10 of depreciation and so forth. What are some of the ways you recommend practicing for those nonverbals and dialing that in and making, like I like to say, make your mistakes in a safe space, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think practicing is the key. It's the number one mistake that I find candidates do is not practicing enough. They'll spend the time writing out their responses or even reading their responses to sort of practice it, or they might even practice with friends. But what they're not doing is practicing on tools that allow them to see how they're doing from an AI assessment perspective. So I encourage students to practice. Sure, you can practice videoing yourself on Zoom or videoing yourself on your telephone or whatever. But one other thing you can do is there are lots of websites out there that actually do this for you. Big Interview, Interview Stream, Zoomer. Those are three of the biggest ones where they have these pre-recorded questions that they ask you. Tell me about yourself. Why do you want to be an investment banker? Why do you want to work at ABC firm? Simple things like that. And you can actually practice, and then you'll get an AI score. How many filler words did you use? What was your rate of speech? What was your eye contact like? Are you looking up and down and around? Are you not staring at the computer lens or talking to the computer lens? Are you doing something else? So practicing using one of those AI tool, vendors is the best way. And I mean, at Amherst College where I was, we had Big Interview, and that was something I told students all the time was absolutely go through and practice the questions on Big Interview, and then look at your score. And then how do you improve? How do you pause effectively? How do you be more succinct, et cetera?
Yeah. Can you say the names of those particular platforms again where folks can go and practice? You said Big Interview.
Big Interview is one. Interview Stream is another. And the third one that I like is called Voomer. It's V as in Victor, Oomer. And they all use various AI assessments to, I hate to say it, but grade the students.
Yeah, evaluate.
Yeah, you definitely want to evaluate. And, what students really have to do is practice this, because just as you practice on your math quizzes or you practice for your chemistry quiz, whatever it is at college, you've got to practice this to do your best.
Yep. Well, you got to practice before you audition for the part, right?
Yes,
that's
absolutely.
what we're doing here.
Yeah.
Okay. No, that's really key, and I think it's practicing is one of those things that it's really easy to say. It's easy for us to talk about, and it's easy for the students to hear that and then smile and nod and be like, "Oh yeah, absolutely." But then when it really comes down to it, and you're in those 3, 5, 7 days before the interview, are you really going to do it? How many reps are you actually going to do? Are you going to do it 5 times, score yourself, and actually change what you're doing? That I think is obviously that's 100 times more important than just hearing the advice.
Absolutely. And I think it is incredibly uncomfortable for you to watch yourself being videoed, right?
Yeah.
Partly, you got to get outside of your comfort zone if you want real growth anyway. And so what I tell people is get uncomfortable, because the more you're uncomfortable, the more you practice, the more you will actually be comfortable in the actual audition.
That's right. If you're comfortable practicing, that means you're doing it wrong. You need to challenge yourself more, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I like it. Okay. Well, I think you mentioned some of the categories here. I think as you think about eye contact, I think that one's pretty easy to understand. I've got my little camera here. I want to be looking at the camera, but my eyes want to keep going over to the notes. So I think that one's easy to understand. But one like tone and enthusiasm, I think makes sense. I guess how does the tool evaluate because there's a lot of different types of folks out there. Some people are a little more extroverted and expressive, and some people are a little more introverted and more reserved. And that's just a natural hard wiring, which I would argue isn't good or bad in terms of investment banker performance. But how does the tool tend to evaluate that if it's looking at tone from your understanding?
Well, I think tone, poise, all of the different metrics that it's looking at, you have to be authentic, because if you're trying to play to the AI tool, you're not going to come across as authentic, and it's going to pick up on that. So first and foremost, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, if you naturally have a soft voice versus a loud voice, be authentic to yourself. Just do things like make sure your microphone is set at the right level so that if you're a soft speaker, it comes across louder. If you are a person that tends to move your eyes around when you speak, because a lot of people I know, when they're thinking about an answer, they look up.
Right.
I'm not sure really why that is, but I'm sure there's some psychology behind it, but that's what they do. So what I tell people is make sure your camera is at eye level. So if your camera is at the bottom of your computer screen, elevate it, make it at eye level. And then second of all, you can put a sticker by your camera lens so that your eyes automatically gravitate toward that sticker so that you're looking at the lens. Or another trick that I really love personally is take a picture and put it behind your lens of someone that you like to talk to, someone that makes you comfortable, whether that's a family member or, I don't know, some people put their pets behind it. But then talk to the picture. Because if you're talking to the picture, it will feel more like a natural conversation. And that's what you want to come across as, natural and authentic in the interview process.
Got it. So it's definitely not like trying to predict what tone they're looking for, and instead just make sure that certainly that your tech is properly performing, you're coming across clearly and with a proper level of volume from a technical, from a computer perspective. But more importantly, but at the end of the day, it's just about, obviously being true to yourself, being relaxed, while also while continuing to convey enthusiasm. But I think what I hear you saying though is yes, it's enthusiasm, but it's your version of enthusiasm. You're not trying to emulate somebody else.
Well, and I would say on top of the enthusiasm, your enthusiasm will come through if you actually enjoy the process.
Yeah.
And what I tell everyone is that if you dread doing these interviews, then maybe this isn't the right thing for you to be interviewing for. This is supposed to be an enjoyable process. It's a process where you're being able to convey things about yourself and why you want to be at this firm and want to be an investment banker or a sales trader, whatever you're interviewing for. You want to be there. And the more you want to be there and you practice wanting to be there, that will come through, and you'll naturally smile more, which is one of those main characteristics that the AI is looking at. They're going to, pick up on your enthusiasm in your voice because you're excited to talk about whatever it is you're talking about. So I think that being authentic is important, but the enthusiasm comes from authentically wanting to be in the process.
Right. And these are all things that really have always been evaluated, but they were just evaluated more informally through a face-to-face interaction or a video or a synchronous, live video interaction.
And I think, sorry, Ben, didn't mean please. To interrupt you, but one thing I would say is part of the reason I think things like HireVue and these artificial intelligence assessments have helped is they've reduced that potential bias that you would get with people interviews, right? Sure. Because I may not click directly with you in an in-person interview, but I can directly connect with the person in the picture behind my camera lens, and that's going to come across in the AI score. So I think it does help in the bias assessment side of things.
Yep. Well, absolutely. And I would say as a former human capital consultant and, executive skill evaluator, I would, in addition to bias, I think there's also just what we would call calibration, where you have different interviewers just evaluate things differently, right? Because there's differences between people. You can train that out to some extent, but how much interview training are people really going through? Probably not very much, right? And then you've just got, right, like the natural variations of somebody's day to day, week to week, month to month. My spouse and I got in an argument this morning and I'm showing up to work without my coffee and I'm in a really bad mood and all my candidates get bad grades that day. So it helps to avoid all those sorts of things.
Yeah, or you're that interviewer that just got pulled into interviewing 6 candidates for the day.
Yeah, and they wasn't even on my schedule. Now I'm
wasn't on my schedule, got pulled in, and I'm in the middle of a deal that's going on.
And now I know I'm not going home until 3 a.m. today because of all this madness.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. Great. Well, let's see. So now, okay. So I think we're kind of following this arc now. So we've talked about what are the ways in which the AI tool will evaluate and generate a numerical score and sort of where that score comes from. So now let's talk about what does the interviewer see? What does the client see here, which is the bank, whether that be an HR, someone from HR, whether that be a banker who's involved in the recruitment process. What do the bankers actually see and how do they use that information?
Absolutely. And I would say it varies firm to firm, and I can't speak. There's no one set processes. But what I would say is they will look at the video content and give a score based on the actual content of the answers. And they're going to look at the AI score. And they're going to compare candidates among each other so that they can determine who moves forward to the Super Day process. Now, I would say that there are some firms that will allow candidates to re-record their answers 1 or 2 times. If that is the case for that particular firm, the hiring committee will also see the number of times a candidate recorded that response, so 2 times or 3 times. And candidates should be aware that that may come into some sort of calibration in the way they want to score that individual. If they took 3 times to talk about how you walk through a discounted cash flow model, for example. But then I would say they score all the candidates together and decide who they're going to move forward to the Super Day.
Don't let me go backwards here, but you just mentioned record it multiple times. I guess I didn't. Do you have the option, at least with HireVue as a specific tool, to re-record something if I think I had a word hiccup, if you will?
It depends on the firm. The firm actually sets whether that's allowed or not.
Got it.
What I would say is that oftentimes if you're allowed 1 additional recording, what I tell most candidates and students that I've worked with is, unless you made a major error, your second recording is never as good as your first recording.
Okay.
Especially with an authenticity perspective.
Okay, that's good advice. But but they can see. But it's expect that the interviewer or the folks on the bank on the the hiring side of the table, they will know that that is your second take.
Exactly. They will know that.
Okay. Um, so yeah, so tell us more about the evaluation process, because ultimately, what are they trying to do? I always like to put myself in the customer's perspective here, the interviewer's perspective, and what they're trying to do is take this group of, let's just say, 50 first round interviews, and they're trying to narrow that down into the, say, 10 or 12 folks who are going to actually go into a hire. And those are made up numbers that's going to change by the firm, but in essence, they're trying to go from this first round to make a cut and then get down to the super day, because you can only have so many people interview on a super day because
Mhm.
it's so labor intensive. And so just tell us a little bit more about that process from what you've seen.
Yeah, so typically they'll have the actual investment bankers or sales traders do the content evaluation. Did they get the answer right? That's
Hmm.
not typically done by a human resource person. So, did they get the content of the answer correct? Or did the content sort of meet what they see as the values and the culture of the firm? So, if you think about it, most of the HireVue questions, those first round interview questions, there might be one or two technical questions, but
Yeah.
the majority of them are fit or behavioral type questions. So tell me about yourself. Why do you want to work here? Tell me a time in which you worked in a team and things weren't going well, etc. And what they're really looking for is, do you portray the same experiences or skills or characteristics that are consistent with the people within our firm? Do you embody the cultural values and mission of the firm? So they're looking at that sort of content, and does that content make sense for the firm? So if a firm believes strongly in integrity, for example, they'll ask a question that might lean toward or skew toward, what would you do in an ethical situation?
Right.
Did the person next to you cheat on an exam? What do you do? Sort of question. And they're really trying to determine whether you have the same cultural values as they do. So that content becomes really important, and they'll score it. And for example, JP Morgan uses a 1-to-6 scoring method the last time I talked to people there. And so one is, you're not portraying an answer that is as consistent as a 6 would be, as consistent with their values of the firm. And they'll score the content of the questions based on that scoring rubric that they have. They'll add that to the AI score that's coming from HireVue, and then force rank all of the candidates to determine who of those 50 candidates make it through to the 12, to use the examples you were using.
Gotcha. Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. I don't think that we covered. Maybe I think that we maybe missed this, but just to sort of jump back, as a student who's made an application and thinks that they've got a really good shot to to get an interview. Um, I guess you had mentioned that there can be some pretty short timelines from when you get an email notification to when when your due date is, I guess, when you have to submit the interview by. So tell us a little bit about that, and where have you seen students go wrong?
Yeah, I think it's important. We talked quite a bit about what is the Goldman Sachs's or Bank of America's or Centerview's or Evercore see, right? And why are they using HireVue? But what's it look like from the candidate's perspective? So you're right that, as we talked about earlier, there's that first round, submit your resume and cover letter. And once the candidate passes that screening, they're going to get an email from the firm that says complete the HireVue. In some firms, JP Morgan's another great example, where in the past, they've only allowed 48 hours from the time the email is sent to the time the candidate has to complete their HireVue. So what I tell candidates is, make sure you're checking your email from the date of your submission every day, because you never know how long you're going to have. Now, they don't all have timelines, but some of them do, and you want to be on top of that. And you also have to know that even if there isn't a timeline, it is definitely a first in, first out inventory method that is used. And so you want to be early in to be early evaluated, because the slots do fill up really fast. So once you get that email link, you want to get to that HireVue, I would say no more than 48 hours. And I would do that as quickly as possible. And then once you click on that HireVue link, the process starts and you can't go back. So it's not like you can click on it within the 48 hours, but wait 72 hours. It doesn't work. So,
Oh, I was just testing it. Like,
yeah,
nope.
just testing it. Nope. Once you click on it, the process starts. So you definitely want to do that. And so then once that process starts, you will record responses, or the candidates will record responses to predetermined interview questions. Those interview questions are either texts that are on the computer screen, or they might have a recording of someone giving you the question. And then candidates are given somewhere between 30 and 60 seconds, again, set by the firm, to prepare. So
Okay.
you're given 30 seconds to really think about how do you want to answer that question. And there'll be a timer that countdowns on your computer screen, 30, 29, 28. So
No
when it gets,
pressure. There we go.
yeah, no pressure. I mean, they are really trying to simulate as much as they can the finance
Yeah.
industry.
Well, I think that's a good point, though, too, right? Because this, when you're jumping into a potentially high pressure profession, that is a way of screening for traits and skills that will help you be effective on the job.
Yeah. And so you get those 30 seconds, it's counting down, and then it goes 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then it starts recording. So you've got to be ready to record from the second it goes from the countdown clock to the recording. And you'll record your answer. And the answers are usually between 1 and 2 minutes for response time. It depends on the complexity of the question, but that's usually the amount of time that you have. If you finish early, you can end the that question and the recording at that point. It's not like if you have 2 minutes to answer and you use 90 seconds, you're going to stare at the computer screen blank for 30 seconds. You can end the interview question. And once that interview question, you've responded to it and either hit the button that you're finished or you finish that 2-minute time, the second question or the next question will come up. You'll have another prep time, then you respond. And that will continue until you get through with all the questions. And then I think the worst thing about a HireVue is you get through that final question and you have nothing that gives you any feedback on how you did. It's not like you're getting any nonverbal or even verbal cues from your interviewer because it's this one-way video interview.
Right. Yeah, you don't even get the courtesy smile and handshake. Great to meet you. You did so great.
It's so unnerving. I hate that about this for the candidates because, you can think you did really well, but did you score well on the AI, right?
Yeah.
Or did you get the answer correct? Most of the time, I think students really know whether they've technically answered it correct, but how'd they do? Did they look up and not realize it? That's where that practice comes in that we talked about earlier.
Absolutely. Well, and on the practice too, I mean, say a little bit more. I think the succinctness that you have to achieve to get a complex answer out and complete in 60 to 120 seconds. I mean, that's also pretty tough. You might know the content of the answer, but I think a lot of people, especially again, this is where I guess from what I've seen, you're getting into different personalities here. Some people who are a little more talkative, a little more expressive, they'll tend to go on a little longer and they might not get the answer out in that 90 or 120 second sort of time frame. So I guess what advice would you have for folks to not just know the technical content of the answer or the specific content of the answer, but also to achieve the succinctness that you need in order to get a full complex answer out in a limited period of time?
I tell students to address it like you would writing a paper for one of your classes, right? You're going to create an outline or you're going to write out the essay answers, right? So what are some of the most common questions that are being asked? And you can ask upperclassmen. I've been collecting questions for the last 10 years while at Amherst College. And what I have found is that the questions don't vary that much year to year.
Yeah.
And so you can ask upperclassmen, people that have been through the process before, what were the questions that were asked? And then go practice those questions. Write down the answers either in a prose format or in an outline format. Then read through it. Then practice it aloud. Then video yourself. Then use some of those AI tools that we talked about like Voomer or Big Interview and really look for, are you using a lot of filler words? Could you say it more succinctly? And plan for a 90-second answer, right? So what I always tell people is, if you really want to be a powerful communicator, especially when it comes to AI evaluated processes, plan your answer to be about 15 to 20 seconds shorter than you expect the answer to be in real time.
Yeah,
so that you won't feel like you have to speak overly fast or cram more things in. You want to have those really emphasized pauses, which demonstrates confidence and knowledge and comfort in your answer. And you want to just practice that more and more. And if you can do it in 90 seconds, what it would take other people to do in 2 minutes, the interviewers will see that, and that demonstrates more confidence and effectiveness to do the job.
Yeah. Well, and you make a good point about having some pauses, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't fill every second with, aggressive words. I think that's something that's maybe a little bit, underrated. I guess, would you give that advice, that something to keep an eye on, especially if you're someone who is a little more talkative? Your
Mm-hmm.
rate of speech, words per second, might be very high, and just slow down a little bit. And when you speak more slowly, it commands more respect in a way, right? You come off as more authoritative in a good way, in a knowledgeable sort of way. Is that your understanding, that the AI, evaluation software would likely view that in a favorable light?
Yes.
Without going too far, right?
Yeah, it absolutely does. You don't want to pause for 30 seconds. That would be really bad. But one thing,
breathe.
Yeah, breathe. Actually, when I do executive presence workshops and stuff with some of my clients, one thing we work on, and it's a great tool to use even in a HireVue interview, is as you get that countdown for that last 5 seconds before you start recording, take a big deep breath, put your hands on your hip, go into a power pose, get into that mindset that you're going to make that answer. Even taking a sip of water right before the recording begins will give your diaphragm a chance to actually expand, and you'll come across more poised and more pausing in the areas. And, well, it'll give you more poise and more confidence in your responses if you'll just take a second to breathe or take a drink of water before you start.
Yep. Oh, great advice. Well, let's continue with some of these tactical tips. I know we've covered a lot about how to speak, cadence, enthusiasm, eye contact. We've covered those pieces of the evaluation. What are the other things that are maybe more objective or more tangible, in terms of how should they be looking, presenting, backgrounds? Say more about those other, not related to the communication, but outside the communication.
Absolutely. Before you ever start down the HireVue process, you've got to do the basics, right? So one thing that you want to do is make sure that you have the right lighting. So turn on all the lights. Make sure that you don't have windows or mirrors or anything distracting in your background. You want to make sure that you are spotlighted. So what I often do is, if you think about all those influencers on Name the Social Media platform, they have those circular lights that they put to highlight them.
That's what I got right here.
Yeah, great. You should use it. Absolutely. I've got my lamps on right near my computer screen so that my face is more highlighted and something is really boring in the background. I even tell students a plain white background is great because you want the spotlight on you and the content of what you want to say, not the things that are behind.
As opposed to your AC/DC poster that's in the back or whatever it is. Yeah.
I once had a student who sent me a practice round of some of his fit and behavioral responses, and he had a big Texas flag in the background. And I'm like, I know you love your home state, but maybe take that down or choose a different location, because all I'm thinking about is you're the Lone Star State kid that answered a bunch of questions. So make sure that your background and your environment is set up to highlight you and not your environment. Yeah. So lighting is key. Again, I actually tell students that elevate that camera lens to your eye level so you're talking at the lens. And I even suggest standing. So right now I'm standing. I love to stand when I talk, partly because I'm more enthusiastic and I don't get exhausted and I don't slouch and I don't do all those other things. Mm-hmm. So if I'm standing, my diaphragm is expanded. I will come across more poised. I will immediately put my shoulders back, and I do all the things that my grandmother always told me to do, right? And so I would suggest posture, poise, all of that is being evaluated by the AI assessment tool. So you want to do all those things. So again, I think background is important, lighting is important, your poise and standing up if you feel comfortable doing that. If you don't like standing, sit on the front side of your chair and don't lean back. And then I would say appearance does matter. I know that we all think that it shouldn't matter how I look, but AI does care. They want to know that you are dressed in a suit. They will actually look to see that you are formally dressed, and that means from head to toe. That means well-groomed and polished. And it doesn't mean being like the COVID commercials that we saw where you were only dressed from the waist up. If you will dress all the way down to your socks and shoes, dress in a suit, you'll dress for success, and that gives a successful interview. And being well-groomed, whether that's wearing the jewelry you normally wear or makeup for the women out there or men for that matter, however is authentic to you, you want to dress that way, but dress in a very professional manner.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I think that can be overlooked, especially the below the waist, if you will. That's not necessarily on camera, but it's about putting the full costume on, right? Fully embrace the role that you're playing. Treat it like you're walking into the door of the bank in person, and bring that level of seriousness. And subconsciously, it does matter. I mean, like you said, it's when you stand up and you do some of the other more subtle things, your whole self just starts to play the right role that you're supposed to play. You go in, you'll naturally start to do some of these things that will be positively evaluated. I do really recommend standing up. I'm not standing up right now, but my desk does go up and down, so I have that ability. But I'd say even if you don't, that's something to really think about. What is your little studio? Do you have some type of high top? Do you have a counter with a box on it and your computer on that with the lighting right, like that? So you're going to need to figure out what's your own little studio and try to figure out a way you can stand. I really do recommend that as well, for all the reasons that you said. And you kind of feel too like less constricted. You can move a little. You can just naturally move a little bit more freely. Now you want to obviously stay centered, but even you can stay centered and move a little bit more. Whereas with a chair, you're just going to feel a little bit more stoic and less relaxed, I think.
Yeah, I once had a student who was sitting, and even though he was sitting in the front of his chair and he was sitting up straight, he had this nervous habit of moving his knee up and down, kind of moving his foot.
Yeah, like kind of bouncing his knee. Yeah.
And it was pretty evident, even in the video of just the waist up, that something was moving.
Yeah.
So I think it does make a difference if you stand, if it's possible, and you feel comfortable doing so.
Yeah. I will say I use a foot pad, like that you might put in front of in the kitchen or something, in front of the stove, so I can cook when I'm barefoot or something. And I have the same thing for my desk. So having somewhere soft to stand, or I guess soft, shoes that are comfortable enough. But I guess I don't want to contradict myself. It is important. You should be wearing the dress shoes as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe I wouldn't. Maybe flats for ladies. I don't know if I would stand in heels, but I guess that's a personal preference sort of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, you mentioned one of the mistakes that a student made, sitting when they have a bit of a nervous tick and they're bouncing their knee, and how that, even though you can't see the knee, it comes through quite clearly in different ways. What are some of those other mistakes that you've seen that that are maybe easy to avoid or hard to avoid? But what are some of the other mistakes that you've seen?
Yeah, I would say everybody gets nervous, and I think that is very normal. And I think we need to understand that we get nervous. The more we practice, the less nervous we're going to feel. But we're still going to have what I call nervous tics. And so some things that I've seen are people with longer hair will tend to play with their hair or do something with their hair or put it behind. So if you're a person that tends to fidget with your hair, wear your hair back, right? Put it in a low ponytail, something that makes you comfortable, or sit on your hands or do something else with your hands so that you're not fidgeting with your hair. And that can go with jewelry, any sort of thing. I had somebody that used to twist their earrings. It doesn't matter what it is, but whatever that is, when you see it in practice, either avoid wearing earrings or put your hair back or learn how not to do it. Mm-hmm. Another thing, if you're a person that is extremely effusive and you tend to talk with your hands, and there are lots of people like that, that's not a problem as long as it's not covering your face or you're talking with your hand in front of your mouth, that sort of thing. So you want to, again, practice, know what's normal for you, and then break those habits that will not demonstrate you or put you in the best light. Another technique I've had people do is put something in your hands if you tend to fidget a lot with your hands, whether that's
just hold a pen or something.
Yeah, a pen, a paper clip, a stress ball, right, that you can squeeze.
Oh, I've got my little squeeze donut here too. There we go.
Exactly. We've all got things that we do. So the point is, going back to what we talked about earlier, practice. Figure out what are those sort of habits or twitches or tics that happen for you, and then start to correct them.
Mm-hmm.
Don't get distracted by it, though. If you happen to have a stress donut in your hand and all of a sudden it goes in the screen, don't freak out.
Yeah.
Right? We all want to be authentic. It is who you are. Just move on and understand that the more you practice, the better off it'll be. But there will be mistakes that happen in a recording. Maybe that's a time you choose to make a re-recording if those are an option for you. But also know that it is who you are, and the person watching it hopefully will also see that you are a real-life person and not a robot.
Well, and also they're sort of evaluating, if you do have a hiccup, how do you recover?
Yeah.
Do you relax, take a breath, just continue on as if nothing happened? How are you going to respond in front of a client? Or is it like a debilitating, type of issue, and you overthink it, and now you're terrified, and things can spiral really quickly. No, that's a good point.
We've all
I think you
sneezed in an interview before. I promise.
you can just, right, exactly. You make it so. I think one of the things that I think it all boils down to is just distractions, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like avoid distractions, whether that be a visual distraction with a big something in the background that's just taking attention away from you, or whether it be something that's part of your wardrobe that is dangling or moving or something, or even then your hands. And I think this was kind of something that I got in the army. If was like, don't touch your face. Like, you don't need to touch your face. Like, stop touching your face in these sort of key moments when you're being evaluated, when you're standing up, giving an interview or a speech, or you're being recorded or viewed. Like, you've got to build that hand discipline and
Mm-hmm.
put your hands where they belong, wherever that is. Whether you're, I don't know, whatever it is, but in the context. But there's really no reason to touch your face, except in an extreme circumstance. I guess if you have a cold and, I don't know, you have a runny nose, that would be the worst thing. I would say figure out a way to to make sure you don't have to blow your nose, I guess, in the interview.
Well, I mean, maybe that's where you spend your 30 seconds of prep time, right?
Yeah,
It's blowing your nose
sure.
and all of those other things too.
Take that Dayquil.
Yeah, that too.
Excellent. Okay. Well, is there any so yeah, I think we really hit a whole arc of things here. Are there any last minute suggestions, ideas, or practices from a candidate's perspective that we haven't covered?
Yeah, and I would say, again, being authentic, be who you are is extremely important, but projecting confidence. We know in the finance industry, one of the major attributes that they look for is someone that knows what they know and knows what they don't know, but can portray what they know confidently. And so whatever gets you confident and going is what you want to do before you ever start, before you ever click on that HireVue link, before you ever walk into the interview. Do your power poses, do your confidence mantras, whatever it is for you. Do that so that you can walk in there confidently that you are the best candidate for the job. And I think if you can do that, you'll come across, whether it's in an AI screening or an in-person interview or a Zoom interview, you're going to come across as a person that they want to get to know because they trust that you will have their back on that team.
Yep, absolutely. Well, that feeds into some of the original tips that you said earlier on in the discussion, which is around do the interview when you can be your best self. Yeah. Right, depending on who you are and what you enjoy, what your preferences are, what your schedule is.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's work out. Drink your water, drink your coffee, go work out, get cleaned up, and then now if that's where you're in your best headspace, but you've got to have the self-awareness to know that about yourself, and as opposed to just winging it and saying, it'll be fine. Even though I've been up since 5 a.m. and I had 2 exams today, and I don't know, I'm imagining a terrible day to do the interview at the end of the day.
Yeah, but you still got to do it just as if you were an investment banker operating on zero sleep, and you still got to do the deal.
It's all a balance. I like to say there's a healthy tension between those two things, right?
They are. But I think, in this new age where we've got all these AI tools that are helping us assess, the key is making sure you've prepped, make sure your environment is lacking in distractions, has the right lighting, is showcasing and highlighting you, and that you've prepared and practiced your responses in a way that allows your enthusiasm and your passion for what you're interviewing for to come through. And if you'll do that as if you're talking to a real person, even if it is a one-way video interview, the person on the other end, that hiring committee, when they look at it, are going to want to bring you in for a super day to see if you're really as real as you come across in that interview.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the end of the day, you've got to control what you can control. So you can control your background, you can control what you're wearing, you can control your preparation. Focus on all those things. You can't control the conversations that are going to happen in the back, behind the scenes after you do the interview. So it's, I always like to say too, if you go through a process and even if you get to a super day and you're not selected, ultimately that's probably going to be for the best, because there's some side of communication there that maybe this wasn't a great cultural fit for you, or maybe there's some good reason that you didn't come across maybe as your best self because it wasn't the right opportunity. So, but in any case, you can't control that. So there's, spending time beating yourself up on things you can't control, it just isn't healthy. So focus on what you can control.
Absolutely.
So, okay. Well, Stephanie, this has been a really fun conversation. Digging into HireVue is such a critical topic that's emerged, and there just isn't a lot of, the level of resources out there on interviewing is massive. But with respect to these newly emerging or relatively newly emerging technical tools, there isn't that much out there. So we really appreciate you sharing the up to the week, up to the hour types of best practices that you've seen recently.
Well, I'm happy to do it, especially the class of 2028 that's about to really start this process come December, January.
Heating up. So this is well timed for the class of 2028. Well, thanks for your time, Stephanie. It's been a fun conversation.
Great. Thanks for having me, Ben.